Welcome to our deep dive. Today it's all about eczema,
Mm-hmm.
or atopic dermatitis if you want to
Yeah.
get technical about it.
Right.
We've got some really good info pulled from a comprehensive guide on this. And we've also got a bunch of your questions. And hopefully by the end of this,
Yeah.
you'll not only know what eczema is, but how to deal with it, whether for yourself or someone you know who might be going through it.
One of the most interesting things I find about eczema is it's so much more than just having dry skin.
Yeah.
It really involves a whole bunch of things like genetics, your immune system, environment, all these things playing together.
Well, that's interesting because the guide we have actually calls it an immune-mediated inflammatory condition.
Right.
So it's not just about, putting on some lotion.
No, not at all.
It's your body, like fighting something in a way.
Exactly. It's your body's defense system sort of going a bit haywire. And one of the key players here seems to be this thing called the skin barrier. I can kind of imagine it like your skin's own personal security team, keeping the moisture in and the bad stuff out. But with eczema, that barrier is weakened, leaving your skin really vulnerable and open to, well, irritation and overreacting to things that wouldn't normally bother it.
So that's why it makes your skin so dry and itchy then.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like the defenses are down and anything can just kind of get in there.
Exactly.
The guide also mentioned genetics playing a role, specifically a mutation in this filigran gene. What is that all about?
So that gene is actually responsible for making a protein that's kind of like the building block for a strong and healthy, hydrated skin barrier.
Okay.
So if you have a mutation in that gene, your barrier is essentially, well, it's full of holes.
Oh, no.
It lets irritants in, moisture out, and it just makes someone way more likely to develop eczema. But it's not just about the genes, though.
Right. So it's kind of like that nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah.
You might have the predisposition to it, but something in your life has to kind of set it off, right? Speaking of which, this guide mentions a bunch of things like soaps, detergents, fragrances, rough fabrics, like basically anything that you could think of that could irritate your skin.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, we can't forget all the allergens like pollen and pet dander. That definitely don't help.
Oh, absolutely not. And you know what I find truly fascinating is even stress and sweat can make eczema worse.
Oh, wow.
It's like your body's already dealing with this weak skin barrier and it's saying, hey, don't add to my workload here,
Yeah, I can see that. I even notice on myself, if I get stressed out, my skin gets a lot drier and more sensitive. So what does this actually look and feel like for someone with eczema?
Imagine this. You're dealing with dry, itchy skin basically all the time.
Okay.
It's not just a little bit itchy, it's intensely uncomfortable, especially at night. And then you've got the actual eczema rash, these red, sometimes brownish gray patches. Often they appear on the hands, the feet, inner elbows, knees.
And for babies, it's usually like their face and scalp. Right?
Mhm. Exactly. So picture this. You're so itchy, you just got to scratch to get a little bit of relief, right?
Mm-hmm.
But scratching actually damages your skin even more, and that leads to this thicker, cracked skin.
And then that makes it even more vulnerable to infection. So it's just this terrible cycle, right?
Absolutely, a vicious cycle.
So you really need to get a proper diagnosis and the right treatment to kind of break that whole thing.
Exact.
Speaking of diagnosis, this guide says that it's mostly a clinical diagnosis. So no fancy blood tests or anything.
Not usually. A skilled dermatologist will examine your skin. They'll ask about your history, consider if there's a family history of allergies. And really, there's no one single test for eczema. So a doctor's expertise, their experience is really key here.
It's almost like detective work then,
Yeah, kinda.
gathering clues to figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
The guide also mentioned allergy testing. Is that to identify specific triggers or?
Precisely. If you can figure out exactly what's setting off your eczema, you can avoid those triggers, and that's a huge step towards managing it effectively.
Makes sense. But I think what everyone really wants to know is how do you actually treat this? Can you cure it?
Well, unfortunately, there's no magic cure for eczema.
Okay.
But the good news is there's a whole range of treatments available. And the key really is finding the right combination for you.
That's good to hear.
Mhm.
So where do you even begin with treatment?
The cornerstone of eczema care is moisturizers. They act as a substitute for that weakened skin barrier, helping keep the moisture in and protecting the skin.
Oh, so you're essentially giving it the extra support it needs.
Exactly.
And this guide recommends using thicker creams or ointments and avoiding anything with fragrances or alcohol because those can irritate the skin.
Absolutely. You want to be as gentle as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when moisturizer just isn't cutting it?
Right.
The guide mentioned medications like topical corticosteroids.
Yeah, those are really effective. They reduce inflammation and itching, so they're often used when eczema flares up. And for those more sensitive areas, there are non-steroidal options as well.
Okay, and for people with really severe eczema, there are even oral medications and phototherapy, right?
That's right. In those cases, a dermatologist might prescribe oral antihistamines to help with the itching, or even short courses of oral corticosteroids to tackle more severe inflammation.
Okay.
And phototherapy, also known as light therapy, can be really effective for reducing both the inflammation and the itch.
Okay.
Basically, it involves exposing the skin to a very controlled dose of UVB light. And surprisingly, this actually helps calm down the immune system's overreaction.
Wow, that's amazing. It seems like there's a whole arsenal of weapons against eczema.
You could say that.
This guide even mentions these new treatments called biologics.
Oh, yeah. Biologics are really cutting edge. They're targeted treatments that work differently from traditional medications. They actually block specific pathways in the immune system that are involved in causing eczema.
Oh, so they're like snipers then?
Yeah, exactly.
Taking out the specific troublemakers that are causing the problems.
Precisely.
It sounds like there's a lot of hope for people with eczema, even in those really tough situations.
Absolutely. There's always hope. And, it's important to remember that treatment isn't just about medication.
Okay.
Managing it long-term is crucial to keeping eczema under control.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So what does long-term management look like? Is it all about just avoiding those triggers we talked about?
Trigger avoidance is definitely a big part of it. Being mindful of what sets off your eczema and minimizing your exposure to it can make a world of difference. But it's more than that.
Okay.
The guide really stresses the importance of moisturizing every day, especially after you bathe or shower.
Why is that so important?
Well, think about it. Every time you bathe or shower, even with gentle cleansers, you're still washing away some of your skin's natural oils.
Oh, that's true.
Moisturizing right after helps trap that moisture and sort of replenishes that skin barrier. It's like giving your skin a big drink of water after a workout.
So it's not just about putting on lotion whenever you feel like it.
No.
There's a real strategy to this.
Absolutely.
And the guide recommends lukewarm showers or baths rather than hot ones because the hot water can really dry out your skin.
Right.
And patting your skin dry instead of rubbing, it's all about being really gentle and protecting that skin barrier.
Exactly. It's about building those good habits and being in tune with what your skin needs.
It sounds like a lot of this comes down to just building good habits and being in tune with your skin and what it needs.
Absolutely. Finding a routine that works for you and sticking to it. And, it's not just about what you put on your skin either.
Okay.
Managing stress is a big part of keeping eczema under control.
That's right. We talked about how stress can trigger it or make it worse, but how do you actually manage stress when you're dealing with something as uncomfortable as eczema?
Well, there are a lot of approaches. The guide suggests things like mindfulness, yoga, relaxation exercises. It's about finding what works for you, what helps you unwind and de-stress.
So it's not just about treating the physical symptoms.
Right.
You have to address the mental and emotional side of it too.
It's all connected.
This is all so helpful, but I know there's a lot of talk about natural remedies for eczema. Can things like oatmeal baths or coconut oil really make a difference?
That's a great question. It's one we hear all the time.
Yeah.
While natural remedies can definitely be soothing and helpful, it's important to remember they shouldn't replace medical treatment.
So they're more like a complementary therapy then?
Exactly. Think of them as working alongside your prescribed treatments. The guide mentions things like oatmeal baths for itching, coconut oil for moisturizing, aloe vera to cool down the inflammation.
Those all sound lovely. I might try those myself, even though I don't have eczema.
Of course, but always a good idea to test on a small area of skin first, just in case you have any reactions.
Yeah, good point.
And, of course, you should always talk to your doctor before trying any new natural remedies, especially if you're already on other treatments.
Safety first, always a good idea. I think that's a good place to stop for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into eczema. We've talked about what causes it, how it's diagnosed, and the many different ways to treat and manage it.
We've really just scratched the surface, though. There's still so much more to explore.
Welcome back to our eczema deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about how important it is to think about managing eczema in a holistic way, using medical treatments, and making changes to your lifestyle. But now let's get to some of those common questions that came in from listeners like you.
Sounds good. A lot of people seem really curious about the link between diet and eczema. Is there any truth to the idea that what you eat can make your symptoms worse?
Yeah, that's something I've wondered about myself, actually.
Right.
Are there really foods that people with eczema should avoid?
Well, it's not quite that simple. You can't just say don't eat this or don't eat that. Diet alone doesn't cause eczema. But some foods can trigger symptoms or make them worse in some people, especially if they have food sensitivities or allergies.
So it's more about, like, being aware of how your body reacts to things than following a strict list of what not to eat.
Exactly. It's personalized. You really have to understand your own individual triggers.
The guide mentions some common culprits, like dairy, eggs, nuts, shellfish, gluten, and soy. What's the connection between those foods and eczema flare-ups?
Think of it this way. These foods can sometimes cause an inflammatory response in certain people, and that inflammation it can extend to the skin and make your eczema symptoms worse.
Oh, like a domino effect.
Exactly, a ripple effect.
That makes sense. So how can someone figure out if certain foods are actually a problem for them? This guide talks about keeping a food diary.
Yeah, a food diary can be really helpful.
Okay.
You can track what you're eating and any changes you see in your symptoms.
Right.
You could also consider doing an elimination diet where you systematically remove certain foods and then reintroduce them one by one to see if there's a reaction.
That sounds like a lot of work. Is that really necessary?
It can be a bit of work, but it's often the most effective way to really pinpoint your triggers.
Yeah.
And of course, always a good idea to work with a healthcare professional or registered dietitian to get some guidance.
That's a good point. Expert advice is always helpful. Another question that came up a lot was about stress and eczema.
Right.
We touched on it a bit earlier, but can you explain a little more about that vicious cycle?
Stress has a big impact on our bodies in general, and that includes our skin. When we're stressed, our bodies release hormones like cortisol, and that can actually mess with your skin's barrier function and immune response.
Oh, so it's like stress is throwing everything off balance.
Exactly. And when you already have that compromised skin barrier from eczema, the stress just adds fuel to the fire, making the symptoms even worse.
And I imagine the itching and the discomfort of eczema can also lead to more stress, so it's like this awful loop, right?
Exactly, a self-perpetuating cycle. But it is possible to break that cycle. And often, the first step is finding effective ways to manage your stress.
So it's not just about treating the skin itself.
Right.
You have to also deal with that underlying stress that can make things so much worse.
That's a key point. Finding healthy ways to cope with stress can be just as important as any topical cream or medication.
This guide mentioned mindfulness, yoga, relaxation exercises as potential stress busters.
Right.
Are there any other strategies people could try?
Oh, there are tons of options out there. It's really about finding what works best for you. Some people find that spending time in nature really helps them unwind, or listening to music, doing something creative.
So it's about finding those moments of peace and calm in the midst of all the chaos.
Absolutely. And for some people, seeking professional help from a therapist or counselor can be incredibly helpful. They can help you develop coping mechanisms and address any underlying stressors that might be contributing to the problem.
That's a good reminder that it's okay to ask for help. In fact, it's a sign of strength.
Definitely.
Okay, let's go back to those natural remedies we were discussing.
Sure.
What are some other things that people have tried to help soothe their eczema?
There's a whole world of natural remedies out there. But again, it's important to proceed with caution and talk to your doctor first.
Safety first.
Yeah.
What are some of the more interesting ones you've come across?
Well, witch hazel is a popular one. It's a plant extract with anti-inflammatory and astringent properties, so it can help reduce itching and soothe irritated skin.
Oh yeah, I've heard of witch hazel being used as like a toner and stuff.
Right.
Interesting to know. Could also help with eczema. What else is out there?
Honey is another interesting one. It has antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties, so it might be able to help with minor skin infections and soothe the affected areas.
Honey on eczema. That sounds kind of sticky, but I'm intrigued. Anything to watch out for with that?
Yeah, you want to make sure you're using raw, unprocessed honey and test it on a small area first. And again, it's not a substitute for what your doctor prescribes.
Makes sense. What about tea tree oil? I feel like that's touted as a cure-all for all sorts of skin issues.
Tea tree oil does have anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties, so it might offer some relief. But you have to be careful to dilute it properly before you put it on your skin.
Okay.
It can be pretty potent and irritating if you use too much.
So a little goes a long way.
Exactly.
The guide also mentioned probiotics.
Yeah.
How do those fit into the picture?
Probiotics are those live microorganisms that are really good for gut health. And there's a growing body of research that suggests a connection between gut health and skin health.
So the idea is that a healthy gut can lead to healthier skin.
That's the theory. When the balance of microbes in your gut is off, it's been linked to all sorts of inflammatory conditions.
Oh, wow.
Including eczema. So probiotics might help restore that balance, and that could potentially reduce inflammation throughout your body.
That's fascinating. So you could potentially improve your eczema just by eating yogurt or taking a probiotic supplement?
It's not quite that simple, but there is some promising research in this area. It's still early days, but it's exciting to see where it leads.
What about other supplements like omega-3 fatty acids or evening primrose oil? Do they have any benefits?
Omega-3 fatty acids, which you can find in things like fatty fish and fish oil supplements, are known for their anti-inflammatory properties. And those can definitely be helpful for managing eczema. Evening primrose oil is rich in something called gamma-linolenic acid, or GLA, and that's shown some promise in improving skin health as well.
Sounds like there's a whole pantry full of potential natural remedies just waiting to be explored. But I think the takeaway here is that those should be used alongside medical treatment, not instead of it.
Exactly. It's about working with your healthcare provider to create a personalized plan that combines conventional medicine and those natural approaches.
That's a great point to emphasize. It's about finding what works best for you with the guidance of a qualified professional.
Right.
This brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive into eczema. We've really dug into some important aspects of this condition, from dietary triggers and stress management to the fascinating world of natural remedies.
Yeah, we've really delved into the complexity of eczema and, emphasizing the need for a holistic approach to treatment and management.
Welcome back to the final part of our eczema deep dive. We've covered so much, from the science behind it to all the ways to treat and manage it. But I want to talk about the future because the guide hinted at some exciting new possibilities for treating eczema by targeting the skin's microbiome.
Yeah, that's what I get really excited about, this whole idea of the skin's microbiome, that community of microorganisms living on our skin.
Okay.
It's a really new area of research in dermatology.
So we're talking about all the bacteria and fungi and viruses and all that stuff.
Exactly, all those little guys hanging out on our skin. And just like the microbiome in your gut, a healthy skin microbiome needs that balance. It needs diversity. Yeah. And research is suggesting that imbalances in that community might actually be a big part of why eczema develops or gets worse.
Oh, so could treatments actually try to restore that balance then?
Yeah.
Like probiotics for your gut, but for your skin?
That's the idea. Scientists are looking at a bunch of different approaches, things like topical probiotics, prebiotics, which actually feed the good bacteria, and even fecal microbiota transplantation for the skin.
Fecal transplants for your skin. That sounds a little intense.
I know, right? Sounds kind of out there. But early research suggests it could actually be really promising. The idea is to take beneficial microbes from a healthy donor and transfer them to someone with eczema, help restore a more balanced microbiome.
It's amazing to think we could actually treat eczema by, changing these tiny communities living on our skin.
It is pretty wild, isn't it?
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have such a better understanding of how complex eczema is and, the challenges people face with it every day.
It really is a complex condition, and it definitely requires attention and understanding and a proactive approach to managing it. But, with the right information and support, people can absolutely find relief and live really fulfilling lives.
That's such an important message for our listeners.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up here, what's the one key takeaway you want everyone to remember?
Eczema is manageable. If you understand what causes it, what triggers it, and all the treatment options out there, you can take control instead of letting it control you. Stay informed, be proactive, and never hesitate to reach out to a healthcare professional if you need help.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many resources out there for support, both online and in your own community.
As we keep learning more about this whole world of the skin's microbiome, imagine the possibilities, not only for treating eczema, but maybe even preventing it altogether. That's something I think is worth pondering.
Yeah, that's a future I'm definitely excited to see. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of eczema. Until next time, stay curious and keep on learning.